Well, she loves you. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, 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 yeah. She's lost her love. Well, I saw her yesterday. Drinking out, and she told me what to say. She said she loves you, and you know that can be bad. She loves you, and you know you should be glad. She said you almost lost her mind. Now she says you know you're not for her kind. She said she loves you, and you know that can be bad. She loves you, and you know you should be glad. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. The love like that, you know you should be glad. You know it's up to you. I think it's only fair. I can hurt you too. Apologize to her because she loves you, and you know that can't be bad. She loves you, and you know you should be glad. She loves you, yeah, yeah.
What you've been seeing and listening to is a special kind of hysteria experienced by the world's youth throughout the 60s. The press dubbed it Beatlemania. And in the next 30 minutes, we're going to look back upon the group that caused all that hysteria, a group known as the Beatles. My guest is Robie Hartling, who may own the most extensive collection pertaining to the Beatles. It's worth how much?
Oh, close to 15,000.
Yeah. How did you get started? There's been a lot now lately about the Beatles. I don't know why it is, and especially since it's been, what, about 14 years since they were together. So why all of a sudden are we seeing, or any ideas on why all of a sudden we've got people wanting them to get back together again? There's records, old records being put together on albums and things like that. A lot of interest.
Well, I feel that, you know, people, well, there's people interested in a lot of nostalgic things, and the Beatles are nostalgia now. The 50s were nostalgia in the 60s, and the 60s now nostalgia being the 70s.
That's true. There was an article recently in one of the daily newspapers about you, and one line in it, and perhaps it was incorrect, I don't know, but it made me sort of smile, that you were not a Beatles fan to begin with, were you? Or was it a mistake? And the way he put it was that before you saw them on the Ed Sullivan, they were just another...
That's true. It was really on the eve of the Beatles show, on the Ed Sullivan show. I was mocking them. I saw this picture in the paper, and it appeared as though John was wearing lipstick, and I put lipstick on and combed my hair down over my eyes, and, you know.
Did you know them before that? Did you hear their music and like them, or not at all, eh?
Not at all. I had heard nothing of them.
So you tuned on the Ed Sullivan show just for the hang of it to see what all it was about?
No, well, I had heard that they were going to be on. I had seen the article in the Saturday paper, and Ed Sullivan was the Sunday show. And, you know, from the beginning of the show, I was still mocking them. At the end of the show, I was converted completely. Yeah.
Do you remember the Ed Sullivan show at all? I can remember several things about it. Number one, that the fact that it did occur on Sunday. We had two masses in my hometown. One was at 12 noon, and the other one was at 8 o'clock. And it being that we were not early risers in the Utley family, we missed the 12 o'clock one, and that meant we would miss the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan show. And being a straight Beatle fan, we had an 80-mile lake in front of us, and the parents made the mistake of going out for a boat ride, and we turned back every clock an hour, and throughout the household, so that when the parents came back, they didn't realize this at all, they didn't notice it, and they were ready to go off to Mass, and we turned on the TV, and there was Ed Sullivan, and the parents said, oh, I don't understand that. How can Ed Sullivan, you know, it's supposed to be 7 o'clock, not 8 o'clock, and we said, gee, power must have gone off to the parents, and they actually fell for it. So that's how we got to see the Ed Sullivan show. But what can you remember about that?
I think well, the thing that really stands out in my mind was when when John came on, they said, sorry girls, he's married.
I remember that.
Which was a classic, you know.
Yeah.
I remember that, but of course I remember the music too, you know, and that really hit me. And I can remember the next day at school, that, you know, was what everyone was talking about, was the Sunday show.
Yeah. That must have been something else for Ed Sullivan, too, to have, because the kids that went to that audience were the real fans of Screaming, and that must have been almost one of the first times that he would experience that, unless, of course, the same thing happened for Elvis Presley.
With Elvis Presley, it did happen. But I think it was completely different with the Beatles. It was hysteria.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a certain hysteria with Elvis Presley, too, but it was subdued.
Yeah.
I'm not subdued, but it, you know, it wasn't as much. With the Beatles, it was, you know, intense.
I remember every time he would mention them. They'd, you know, well, pretty soon the Beatles would come up teasing the kids, and that would be it. A wave of screaming would go by. It was really
incredible. I don't think anyone had really, except for Elvis, experienced something like that before. Anything like that
and then
before.
He called them over, and I'm not too sure, but I believe he couldn't quiet down the fans, and he said something like, "Shh, quiet, or I'll cut their hair," or something like that.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And got them all excited, and they quieted down.
Right. Tell me something about your collection and why you want to start a Beatles fan club, which might strike some people as rather odd that years afterwards you would want to start it. Now, what's this all about?
Well, I think basically it goes back to my childhood. I was, I guess, too young when the Beatles first came out, and I never joined a Beatles fan club at all, you know, while they were still around. And now I'd like to get something going. There are, well, I'd say thousands of fan clubs in the world, and I don't believe there are, you know, there may be a handful in Canada, if any at all. And I really feel that there are a lot of, well, I know for a fact that there are a lot of people in Canada that still admire the Beatles and would want to join something like this, you know, just share ideas and things like that.
And what you're after now is the serious fan, which you can do now because we've all grown up. We're not.
That's right. But now there are still a lot of young people. Through the article in my paper, I had well, 4 or 5 calls, and at least 4 of them were young.
I was surprised to hear that when you mentioned that.
Yeah, well, it surprises me still. I've come across it. I know that in the States they hold Beatle festivals, 3-day affairs, 2-day affairs, and they have a lot of young people there that go there and collect the memorabilia. And, you know, just, I mean, a lot of young people, you know, when I say young, 15 and under, that really like the Beatles.
These conventions at all? I hear a lot about Star Trek conventions, but...
No, I myself have never been to one.
Whatever happened to the big American fan club? Or I had always read that there was a big, major, the Beatles fan club for all of America down in the States somewhere.
Yeah, that was called Beatles USA, and we were talking before, and I don't believe it really was a fan club as, well, such as the Beatles fan club in England. It was more or less an outlet to sell goods, you know, bearing the Beatles' faces and signatures.
Well, speaking of goods, we were down at your place recently to take a look at some of your collections, and we do have a clip of that, and if our people in the back would like to roll that, perhaps you'd like to comment about it. You've already mentioned it's worth thousands now. What kind of things do you have in there?
Oh, well, you name it. Well, Beatle wigs, and these on the screen now are bobbing Beetlehead dolls. They were sold, they sat in the back of cars back in the 60s, early 60s.
There were a lot of different kinds of dolls. We're seeing even more of them, a toy type thing. I remember when we went to see the Beatles in Seattle, we had bought some of the kits that you made and you could paint to go up there. And I remember Customs, when they were stopping, spotted them and they said, "Let me guess, you're going down to see a Beatles convention," you know. And millions of books.
Lots of books.
Yeah.
A lot of books that were written about the Beatles. Still being written.
And yet a lot of them have different, you know, you don't know really which, you know, the ones that I was reading, you know, there's so many, everybody had a different side to it, and you sort of wonder which was true or, you know, which...
Yeah, there actually were only a small amount of books that were written during the 60s that really had any semblance to truth. A lot of them were just, you know, fan books.
What's that in a small packet there?
It's a yellow submarine. They weren't gum cards. They were a set of cards that were distributed in England in tea.
with bubblegum cards and everything else. I noticed the name Hunter Davis on one of those books. That was supposed to be one of the major...
Yeah, the authorized biography.
The authorized biography, and yet John Lennon had a different thing to say about that book.
No, that's true. Back then, it was the authorized biography simply because nothing else had been written that was, close to the truth further.
And yet John Lennon, in a later interview, denounced it as just a sort of a fan that had written a book, and it was not close to the truth at all.
But it was as close to the truth that was written in the
sort
60s.
of, quote, shall we say, bad things written, or maybe closer to the truth, before the Beatles were just four mop-tops that had a great sense of humor and weren't involved in this, that, and the other thing. And yet Hunter Davis came up with, parts of the story that hadn't been brought out before.
Yeah. But again, he just basically told the story.
Yeah, much like almost Elvis Presley now is. He seemed to be surrounded by goodness, and now, whether it's because he's died or whatnot, there seems to be a lot of behind-the-scenes looks at Elvis too.
And there were a lot of things coming out on Elvis too.
Now, those are jackets on records, eh? If some of these things we're seeing now.
Yeah, there will be records shown. These are lobby cards that were displayed in the lobbies of theaters where the Beatles played.
I'll pretend that I'm kissing.
And Beatles dolls.
Inflatable dolls. They were molded after the cartoon series. They're shown there.
Those are the kits I was referring to earlier.
Yeah, those are the model kits. I'm holding John there, and my little wallet.
Where would you
Which
collect all this stuff? No, you don't take with you any.
I really have a lot of contacts all through the States mainly, but in Germany and England and in Canada too.
How did you get these contacts? How did you start?
Well, you write away to the one person that you hear about, and somebody else gets your name from the fellow that you write away to, and they send you a list too. And that's the lunch pail that was sold during the first onslaught of Beatlemania, '64.
High school kids forsook the status symbol of the paper bag and went back to the lunch pails when those came out. And I remember those. Sneakers, yeah. You had a lot of stuff that I didn't know were brought out. I remember seeing an awful lot of Beatle collecting items, sort of, but I never realized.
Well, a lot of these items were sold maybe exclusively in England or New York City area.
Thank you, folks.
The game I'm holding up there is a flip your wig game.
Any idea how it was played?
No, I still don't know.
Still haven't figured out the rules and regulations to it?
I'll play it one of these days.
There are a lot of games that were brought out.
That's the only authentic Beatle wig.
And they had them in garage stations. They had them everywhere.
That lump of plastic in there is it.
You know, we look at the hair now or back then, and it's short compared to what it is now, but that was quite the it caused outrageous. A lot of problems. Outrageous in the schools, and
they'd send kids home and everything.
I remember there used to be a group from our football team that used to watch out for people with long hair, and boy, they'd grab them and
beat them up.
Yeah, not just beat them up, just cut their hair, which was the worst thing.
I was threatened several times.
I have a few buttons.
Yeah.
I think it's only fair if I couldn't hurt you to apologize to her.
Any idea how many you have?
Oh, no, I haven't counted them, but quite a few.
Stranger. Super stuff, yeah, great stuff.